let's jump right in then. We're back for presumably episode 2. See, I feel like it's okay to be vague.
Absolutely.
Because people, if they want, they can look at their pod player, their podcast listening device, and it'll say number. That'll probably be the first thing in the title, like episode.
Yeah, 2. We're not gonna give these episodes long titles.
So why do you need us to validate, your vision of reality?
And if there's anything people need in modern life, or if there's anything that people don't need in modern life, it's certainty.
I think there's just this inappropriate sort of coddling of the listener in most podcast culture these days.
Definitely.
It's like, oh, we need to say the podcast episode. And
I like how you said most podcast listening these days, as opposed to other days.
Well, the podcasting has had a long and varied history.
The podcasting of yore, there was none of that coddling.
None of that coddling of listeners. No, it's just a sense of like, oh, we have to say the episode number, and it has to be the same as the episode number in the title.
Well, see, people think of it like it's radio.
Right.
And it's really not radio.
It's really not radio.
You're not listening to the radio.
I think of this more as, and this is, kind of building on what we were talking about in the last episode, but...
Which episode was that?
Episode 1, presumably, where we talked about the progressive rock band Magma.
What was it called again?
Magma.
Oh yes, I vaguely remember that.
Yes, it was a while ago, an indefinite period of time in the past, so I see this as sort of like a progressive podcasting.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. I really want to kind of build on. I want to be a new wave podcaster. Yeah. So anyways, we can innovate on the medium by just confusing people. Very good.
Well, maybe we should make this is episode 2, presumably. So, but we're talking about the podcast and like the nature of the podcast in this episode. So
maybe episode 2 we should go, but maybe we should just go ahead and put this in before the Magma
episode 1.
And we'll just roll it that way, and if people are confused, screw them.
Or just release episode 0
yeah.
into the mix and confuse everything.
Yeah, nobody wants to listen
to that. And make
this
this episode 3.
Presumably, I'm Thomas.
And I'm still Ben.
Ben's still Ben. And this is Obscurigami, a show / podcast where we talk about obscure things.
So, Thomas, tell me about something obscure tonight.
The obscure thing that I've done some reading about is, first off,
for a little background,
by way of intro, I'll start with something that is not really at all obscure. Have you ever heard of the video game World of Warcraft?
Is that one of those like open source?
You want to imagine kind of like a Biniacs?
I see. So it's a bit of a puzzle.
No, it's really nothing like that. So
I want you to picture a duck on a pond.
Yes.
World of Warcraft is nothing like that.
World of Warcraft is nothing like that. World of Warcraft is a MMORPG, massively multiplayer online role-playing game.
Yes, everybody knows that.
The biggest, yes. So, if you don't know that, we'll probably just erase this episode, release the Magma one, and call it an evening.
You wanna jump back to, or do you want to just keep going?
Well, we'll just
keep going.
We'll just keep going. So, because even if I edit that all out, all they really missed is World of Warcraft is a game that everybody knows about. So,
right.
But in September 13th, 2005, World of Warcraft. I don't know however many people play this game, it's a lot. A plague breaks out in the game. There was I think it was an expansion that was released, and it had a boss fight. in it, and this boss had when you fought them, they had a certain attack that sort of like shot a type of kind of disease at you, and it slowly it was called the corrupted blood, and it, as the name makes it sound, corrupted your character's blood, and it would inflict kind of like a certain amount of damage to you over time, and it could spread to the other players that were with you who were fighting this boss.
Right.
And so it was designed as a disease, but in a very unintended way, this disease began to spread through the quick teleportation aspects of the game.
Oh wow!
So it was meant to be contained to the initial boss fights, which would only be accessed by higher level players who could make it to that boss.
Right.
But some of these people who were infected would teleport out to cities or things like that, and the infection would spread to players that it wasn't intended to spread to. And within a matter of, I think within a day, most of the World of Warcraft servers had kind of been hit by this outbreak of the plague.
Wow.
And players described, and there's some screenshots of walking into cities that were just carpeted with skeletons and corpses.
So a player could actually be destroyed by this virus?
Weaker players were killed. Most of the stronger players, a lot of the ones that would have been originally infected, it was just kind of bothersome. It would, just inflict damage over time, and then they just have to continue healing themselves or whatever. Go ahead.
So I'm playing World of Warcraft.
Right.
It's September. I just signed up for the game.
Yeah.
In 2005, and as a new player, I'm extremely vulnerable to this, and my character can get killed.
Yes.
Right away.
Yeah. You would basically walk into a city and, get infected and probably die.
Wow.
Immediately. Fortunately, in the game World of Warcraft, death is not permanent. Your character can respawn.
Fortunately.
And you keep aspects of your character, so it's not like you're reset to the beginning. If you're like a level, 30 or something and you died, you wouldn't be reset to 0.
Right.
So it wasn't, the worst thing was that it kind of made the game unplayable for several days until they were able to kind of clean up and patch
Now the question is,
plague.
Was it a deliberate stunt, do you think?
It was not. It was, according to Blizzard, the developers, it was unintentional.
Now, do we believe Blizzard?
I didn't encounter any skepticism in my readings. There didn't seem to be any skepticism. Although this is looked upon by some World of Warcraft players as one of the most exciting events. It was kind of, a lot of players did initially assume that it was intentional. And it was just kind of, prior to this, there hadn't been really any like game-wide sort of events or things made to do this sort of thing. And so to some people it was very exciting. There was a sort of novelty to it. The idea that just like there could be a disease and infection that would impact this whole game online in such a way was very new. This was before games like Eve had really kind of risen into popularity, where there's kind of game-changing events like that happen a little more commonly. But
so this accident kind of influenced the evolution.
It did.
Of gaming.
Even very directly. In 2008, I think it was, Blizzard followed it up with an intentional zombie outbreak disease that functioned in a very similar way. The main thing they changed was with the corrupted blood, it had an infection rate of 100%, so it's highly contagious. And the intentional zombie outbreak later in the game was much less contagious. You only had a chance of being infected if you would get near.
Now that's another question I wanted to ask was, how did it transmit the corrupted blood?
I think it was through proximity.
Literally, if your avatar was close to another infected avatar,
I think
you would be infected.
It would be a lot of players had pets, and the disease was spreading even through the pets. And one of the reasons it kind of hung around for so long, especially in populated areas where there were non-player characters, so like a merchant at a stand or something like that would get infected, and these players had just incredibly strong health so that the normal players couldn't just like kill them, and they would just stay infected and then infect anyone who...
Wow.
So you could... And you didn't become immune. So like you would play, you could go into a city, get infected, die, respawn, go back into the city, get reinfected.
So it literally spread just like a real plague.
It spread.
Like it spread through the animal population.
Yes.
And wow, that's fascinating.
So
that's a fascinating art imitating life scenario.
Yes. There was something interesting that happened was there were people who, of course, found it quite enjoyable to spread the plague, and they were referred to as terrorists. But there were people who would make it their goal to spread the plague to as many parts of the map.
How long did this last until they...
I believe it was like 3 or 4 days till they kind of... They started patching it pretty soon, but it took a while for it to kind of...
Gotcha. So this was enough time that obsessive gamers could really...
Really, yeah. I imagine most of the really obsessive Warcraft gamers were probably strong enough to where, they could kind of survive it. Because it was mostly
terrorists and
then become terrorists or just, hang out not in cities or something where most of the death was happening.
Were there like quarantine zones?
Not officially, but I mean they may have developed in an unofficial manner. A Reddit user, the Purple Hammer, gave an antidote from this time he was playing, and he said, apparently despite nuking and clearing out the server by Blizzard to eradicate the plague and its carriers, the proponents lived a Taliban lifestyle and would hide, infect their pets for reinfection, and would infect non-player characters for further spread. Human nature is truly revealed at its finest level when given anonymity and immortality. So even once Blizzard started trying to get rid of the plague, there were people who found it their calling to carry the mantle of the corrupted blood, so to speak.
Wow. So, does it still exist, or is it pretty much completely eradicated?
I think it's eradicated now. I think later versions patched it
completely out,
complete way,
or made it incompatible with newer versions.
It gets better, as you pointed out earlier. Well, here I'll throw in this little fact before I get to kind of part 2. This was not the first disease, interestingly enough, to ravage a game. There was an incident prior to this in May of 2000 where many players of The Sims were outraged when their game characters died because of an infection from a dirty virtual guinea pig. So apparently there was a similar incident. I don't think it was quite to the scale because I don't think The Sims... I don't believe The Sims was really played as an MMO. if it was
Certainly not to the scale
not to the scale
of Warcraft.
but yeah, there was an infected guinea pig incident 5 years earlier.
It must have been multi-game if there was
Yeah, I mean,
either that or inherent in the games.
in the game itself. But I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting.
Let me just look through my notes here and see if the zombie plague in 2008. I mentioned that.
Right. Which was intentionally created.
Yes. Okay. So let's get down to part B. As you pointed out earlier, this is an interesting example of how plagues and disease can spread. And
in real life.
It caught the attention of quite a few people and sparked some discussion in the academic community.
Interesting.
In March 2007, Randy Balliser, an epidemiologist physician, wrote a paper in a journal comparing the plague to real-world outbreaks. And there was very much there was a small but somewhat passionate movement to harness this. It really seemed to spark in a group of scientists this idea that games like this could really be a means for research in a way that previously was not possible.
Right.
Or especially in a way like computer simulations can't really
Right.
do because
you have the human element.
You have the human element, and the interactions are more realistic, and people respond to it. Nina Furman, a Tufts University assistant research professor, she also wrote some about how it should be used as a research method, and there was a lot of talk about how this is the only possible way that we could ever do this kind of research.
Simulated plague.
Yeah. Simulated plagues like this. But there was a bit of a backlash to that. Not everybody was quite on board with that. Neil Ferguson, director of the MRC Center for Outbreak Analysis and Modeling at Imperial College in London, he was kind of on the other side, saying that the nature of the environment and being that it's a game with respawning and lives kind of taints the nature of the simulation, quote unquote, too much for it to really be used.
Well, you're much more likely when you're talking about like the terrorists,
right?
Like that's not as likely to develop
in real life
as it is in the game.
Yeah.
Although it still could potentially develop. The one question I was going to ask you was, were there people in the game who were trying to fight it within the game? Like, were there people that were trying to create
like counter terrorism cells?
Well, no, like basically trying to be Brad Pitt in the middle of World War Z.
Yeah.
That were like trying to find ways to combat the disease.
Not that I came across.
So basically, everybody was like too helpless.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a situation where you were either fairly helpless and you would just die if you came in contact with it, or you were fairly strong and you could withstand the plague.
Right.
But
like those people who were withstanding it,
right,
were not really organizing or mobilizing to try and fight it. There
wasn't really a clear thing they could have done.
Right.
But
they weren't like trying to. Well, I guess if they had been infected by the plague.
Well, Blizzard.
They weren't trying to like hoard innocent people into like shelters.
Right. Yeah. Blizzard's best response was to just shut down infected servers.
Right.
And some of the terrorist groups kind of found ways of getting around that. But this quote in particular, Yale University terrorism expert Stuart Gottlieb admitted that while the outbreak was interesting and relevant to the times, he would not base counterterrorism strategy on a video game.
Well said, Stuart.
And and Blizzard's official comment on this whole kind of discussion about whether or not it should be used for terrorist research, because there was kind of that suggestion too.
Right, yeah.
And also just disease and outbreak research. Blizzard said, Blizzard has maintained a position that World of Warcraft is first and foremost a game, and that it was never designed to mirror reality or anything in the real world.
Thank you, Blizzard.
So they pretty much brushed everyone's grandiose visions of research and Pulitzer Prizes, or no, that's a journalism thing.
Nobel Prizes.
Nobel Prizes. Because of World of Warcraft.
Emmys, Tonys, Grammys.
Oscars. Whatever they give to video game people. And they were like, no, it's a game.
Well, it's interesting because they did create their own outbreak themselves.
Yeah, they found it to be a valid gameplay mechanic later on.
But that would be an interesting opportunity to include researchers, and I guess they opted not to do that.
Yeah. I don't know if there would be, I guess they just don't find that. It's an interesting discussion because on one hand, I can definitely see it's like, on one hand, it's more valid than a computer simulation. You have that human element, you have, human interactions in a more realistic way. But on the other hand, do you really want to do research that you're going to subsequently base, counter-terrorist efforts or anti-plague epidemic
Right. Do you really want to bet people's lives on research based on World of Warcraft?
Right.
I certainly get that, but it seems to me like it's a great study in psychology, in human psychology, to see what people do when unexpected things like that happen in a mass context.
Yeah.
So I think even if it wasn't used for any grand purpose, it would have been interesting if it had been academically researched and recorded. Yeah. Just to see like what I was talking about, like were there people who were like trying to fight it or just to see what people would do when faced with that set of circumstances. Yeah. Even in a fantasy environment, I think would be fascinating for psychology. Yeah. Psychological purposes.
Well, and I think even more so than World of Warcraft at that time, there are games now that could probably be researched. I know EVE Online, there's so much actual economic weight in what goes on in the game, and there's a real world cost associated with some of the top players in EVE are dealing with in-game resources and things that have real world values, like if they were to sell them in game of thousands of dollars. Yeah. And so that certainly gives much more weight to interactions and actions and stuff like that. And I think would kind of lend itself to more interesting research.
It'll definitely be interesting to see the development of academic study of games and gaming, because it's in its literal infancy now. Even things of like 100-year-old arts, like film and television studies are in their infancy now on the academic scale. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. Yeah. That was a fascinating topic.
I ran across it, and some people on Reddit were posting, because September 13th is
the anniversary.
Remember, never forget the corrupted blood.
Interesting that it falls so close to September 11th too. Yeah, another anniversary, real life anniversary.
I'll put a link to there's quite a few articles and stuff about this.
And you said you couldn't talk for a full episode about this. Little did you know.
I'll put a link, of course, in the show notes wherever they wherever they are.
The presumable show notes.
And you'll be able to find photos of this there, but I just want to show Ben some photos of this plague because it's truly a sight to see. But yeah, I mean, and each of those skeletons is a player death.
Wow. Huh.
And it just ravaged.
The devastation here, folks, is terrifying.
The streets were just carpeted.
Wow.
So
The bodies hit the floor.
You can see how, as kind of this thing that came out of nowhere, it was a pretty impactful event for the players.
I would imagine so. It seems intentional. It seems like something that the game, looking at it, it just looks like something that the game designers would have planned, but
that they meant to do.
I guess they didn't.
They did later.
Well, that was fascinating.
Yeah, that was corrupted blood. A very well, the game itself is not that obscure, but it was somewhat of an obscure event within the game. And what I found most intriguing was the sort of academic discussion that surrounded because I read some of the papers that were written by some of these academic types, and just the sort of how adamant they were that it was like it had suddenly dawned on them, video games, this is an opportunity we must leverage. Lives will be saved.
Yes.
If we can just leverage this in the correct way.
Academia does have a way of, I guess, because the whole point of it is to be persuasive.
Yes.
You're sort of forced to throw yourself in wholeheartedly to one side or the other.
I think so. Transitioning now, this is our random Wikipedia article section.
Where we push the random button.
And
see what comes up on Wikipedia.
See what comes
and then
up.
we talk about it.
Then we'll have a little chat about it.
Little conversation.
So today's Wikipedia article is Zemania, a city and a municipal board in Gazipur district in the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh. And I'm sure I slaughtered every single one of those pronunciations.
Uttar Pradesh.
Yeah. So I feel like this is fairly obscure because I haven't heard of this.
It does seem to be.
I haven't heard of the state it resides in, nor the district, nor the city itself.
Apologies to our Indian listeners.
I'm sure you're all very familiar.
Our complete absence of knowledge. So
It's-
give me a little bit more.
It's located on the banks of the, how do you say the river?
The Ganges.
Yeah, the Ganges.
Oh, there's a new bridge under construction.
It's divided into two main towns.
Founded in 1560 by Ali Quli Khan, the governor of Jaunpur, named after his title, Khan Zaman. So, Khan Zaman.
It has two colleges.
Oh, wow.
The Hindu PG College and one that I won't attempt to pronounce.
How many people live in this fair city?
25,000 roughly.
Gotcha.
Which is a pretty decent size for a town that seems to, its most notable aspect seems to be its railway station.
Mm-hmm.
It literally says, the Wikipedia article literally says, Zamania is a railway station on the main rail. Yeah,
How big of an area are we talking about in mileage?
I mean, it's a railway station, Ben.
Well, there's two colleges in this railway station. So it's looks like about 100 miles from Nepal.
So it's in north.
Yeah. Okay.
Northeast.
I have a better
India.
concept now. Well, if you live in Zamania or know anyone who does, please let us know. We'd be happy to give them a call.
We've expanded our geography knowledge by a small amount.
A tiny percentage.
Yeah, there we go. I think at some point we should try hitting because before you can drill down to hit a random article, you have to choose the language of Wikipedia that you're in.
Right.
I think in a future episode, presumably, in a presumably future episode,
Right.
because we don't know, who knows if we record, 10 episodes and they come
Yeah.
out before this one. Um, we should go to a foreign language,
Uh-huh.
random article on the foreign language, then translate it to English, then see what that's about. I feel like that might yield some interesting results.
I agree. Perhaps something from the language of Kobayan.
Perhaps.
Continue with your lives.
Yeah.